Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julianne Grant, and welcome to our webinar, 5 Ways to Get More Business Value from Your PLM System. I'm from Razorleaf, and I'll be your moderator today for this webinar. Let's look at our agenda for this afternoon. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of our speakers and talk a little bit about where we came from with this particular research that we worked on. Jim's going to take us through his research findings that we worked on together as we developed this topic about how we could help more people get business value from their PLM system. And then Derek Needing from Razorleaf is also going to take you through some next steps about what you could be thinking about once you hear about some of these ways to get business value. What are things you could possibly be doing in your organization? Let's just take a quick look at our speakers. So I just want to welcome Jim Brown from 𝙁𝙀𝙆𝙍𝙍 and Derek Needing from Razorleaf. We've been working with Jim for several years since I've been with Razorleaf. He's an analyst in the PLM community, and he's based out of Philadelphia. Derek is, I think, employee number 3 of Razorleaf. He's been around for a long time and was with vendors who implemented PLM before PLM, I think, was even a term. So I'm really excited to have some great speakers here for you today to take you through some new information about PLM and where it's going. Next slide. So just real quick, as I said, we've been working with Jim in the past on trying to help identify different trends that are going on in the industry. So previously to this research, we would work with him on an integration research project. But just so you know, we will be sharing Jim's new ebook with the research findings he's revealing in this webinar after the webinar is over. We'll be sending this along with the recording, and you'll be receiving that in your email. A couple logistics before we get started. We will be having a question and answer session at the end. I will be monitoring the questions panel in this GoToWebinar panel that you have in front of you. So please feel free to enter any questions you may have. And again, we are recording this and you'll get that as well. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim.
Great, thanks, Julianne, and thank you for including me in the webcast today. I'm really looking forward to talking about this. This is a super interesting topic, I think, to help companies really find different ways to get more value from PLM. So we're going to walk through a few things. I've got a couple of little introductions and talk about some of our research. But then we're going to talk about how and why and how to tell if the value that you're getting from PLM is stalled. And we do see this quite a bit. We'll talk about the value that PLM can really play as a foundation for growth. And then we're going to talk about 5 different ways that companies can choose to expand value. And they're not all entirely separate. There's combinations of aspects that you can pull together for different initiatives. But the key thing is we'll kind of walk through each of them and share them, and hopefully give you some ideas of ways that you can expand and talk about some next steps before handing it over to Derek. So if you don't know 𝙁𝙀𝙆𝙍𝙍, we're an independent research firm. We really focus on trying to help manufacturers understand how to get more value from better processes and better technology. We do a lot of these kinds of, a lot of research, a lot of surveys, and those types of things. In terms of my intro, I always like to make sure people know it's not Jim Brown, the Hall of Fame football player, James Brown, Godfather of Soul, or if you've seen the bio picture, I get Jim Carrey a lot. Instead, I hope to bring a broad background in industry and the software industry to bear today to talk about PLM. I've worked in industry. I've worked actually doing enterprise systems implementations. Worked in the software industry, and then actually for almost 20 years now, really have been in this role of an industry analyst trying to help understand how do companies really get the most value out of their software. And I hope that really helps to bring to bear some of the ways that we've seen companies start small and grow continued value over time. So in terms of the research I'm going to be sharing today, and Julianne mentioned that you'll get a copy of this ebook after the webcast today. Certainly feel free to take a look at that. And in fact, Julianne mentioned we're gonna talk a little bit about the previous survey that we did on PLM integration, and that's another great resource if you are interested in learning a bit more about that. And I know it's got some survey data in it. So we're going to talk about our experience. We're going to look at some information from some other surveys that we've done, and then we actually had a chance to talk with a couple of Razorleaf customers. One of them, transportation equipment manufacturer, and another large nuclear services provider that works in the nuclear industry. So we'll share some of their perspective, and there's a little bit more of that actually in the ebook itself. So, I kind of like this picture, this beautiful first and second floor, all bricked up and everything, and then lots of potential to build on top of it. And one of the things that we've seen is that companies get stalled for a number of reasons. Oftentimes when, I'm sure Derek sees this as he goes in to understand the goals for a new PLM system, you hear a lot of things people talk about. We want to collaborate better with our suppliers. We want to work more tightly with our supply chain. We want to have a more streamlined product development process without sharing things back and forth via email, and getting away from sharing requirements documents via email or a shared folder or Dropbox. We want to drive much higher efficiency in new product development and engineering. We want to be able to iterate more to get better products, more innovative products, higher quality. There's a huge number of business goals that people have for PLM, and one of the things I love about the product lifecycle management approach as well as the systems is when done right, they can really do two things. They can impact efficiency and cost very well, and give sort of bottom line kinds of advantages to companies. But what we also see is that PLM can often drive new top line revenue. It can increase the amount of sales companies get by getting products to market faster, by getting better products to market. And so, those are the kinds of things we hope to see companies have in their goals. Now, having said that, most of the time they can justify it just based on engineering productivity. But when they come in with these goals, oftentimes they end up with a phased approach, which we favor. We really like people to be able to start small and grow. But sometimes they get into a mode where phases 2, 3, 4, and beyond don't get funded, and they kind of stall. And that's really a good place and a bad place to be. The bad news is you didn't get further. The good news is you have that foundation that's there. It's ready to build on, and you've got a lot of room to grow, even if all you've done so far is do some engineering data management, engineering CAD file management. So we firmly believe that PLM is a great foundation for growth. And we do see a lot of companies start with product data management, getting CAD files under control, making sure that they're not overwriting each other's CAD files, making sure that they can easily find and reuse information in engineering. And those are some core basics that absolutely make sense to get started. Maybe building on top of that some basic processes like review and release to manufacturing, maybe an engineering change process. And then, as you see in this slide, as companies mature, going in the vertical direction, they get away from just managing the product-centric information to moving to more process-centric and project-centric information, and then beyond into sort of an extended PLM mode. And we'll talk more about what those different dimensions are as we get to them. So, we really believe that there's a tremendous amount that you can get out of PLM. We firmly believe in a phased approach to get it in, get it working, build a foundation, and grow. But there is that risk, and the risk of the phased approach is that you don't get to the next step. And again, it's a good news, bad news. The bad news is you may be stalled. The good news is you've got a fantastic place to start from. We talked to a couple of different companies during this, and the nuclear services provider that I spoke to took that approach. And basically what they said is, first, we want to just get a better system in place. We wanted to get the basics in. We wanted to make sure that we had things under control. But then they took the opportunity and the strategy to say, okay, what can we do to get more from it? And really what we like to think of with that is, look at the problems that are in your business. Look at the issues that you're having. Look at the opportunities for how your company can grow. And in those situations, there's probably a lot in PLM that can be extended to help it. And most companies, as even if they're building out, a digital twin or a digitalization strategy, will look now and find out a lot of what's in PLM is absolutely applicable. They've got the core in place, and it's time to start adding on some new elements to it. So what do we recommend? We do think that it's important to lock in the basics, and you don't always have to start with data management. Excuse me. We do find a lot of companies do, but you don't have to. There's definitely some other options. But our PDM framework really talks about three main areas, and it's about controlling your product data, making sure that you're not losing files, making sure you don't have your lead engineer out with his laptop somewhere has the most recent assembly on his hard drive, and at the same time making sure that it's not sitting out in a Dropbox where it potentially is not as secure as you would want it, but also isn't under the level of control for things like duplication and engineering change control that you would want. So making sure that it's under control, easy to find, and when we say easy to find, we don't just mean easy to find a file, easy to find the file, the right one, the right revision, know what state it's in, know whether it's in use, etc., and then being able to share that information. And the first step in that really is even just being able to share it across the engineering team, even before you get out to deeper collaboration with customers, suppliers, third-party engineering firms, and those types of things. So let's talk a little bit now about expanding PLM value, and this is what we call the 4 dimensions of PLM expansion. And these are all different vectors that companies can expand PLM in a direction that will provide enhanced business value. And again, I mentioned before, these are not mutually exclusive. I'm sure as I talk about some examples, it's always hard to talk about expanding a process to a new process without mentioning that you're probably including some new people involved as well. But the key areas are involving more people, getting it outside of engineering, making sure that you've got a broader constituency that can access information. And as much as anything, it keeps you from having to look up data. As an engineer, it keeps you from having to look up data for other people. But it also helps with things like concurrency and having people work on things, as you're developing them. A broader view of the product. And one of the things that we see most people start in PLM with a very technical, a very engineering-centric or R&D view of the product. All right, what are the specifications? What are the maybe we're adding some GD&T. Maybe we've got some different variant bombs and those kinds of things. But there's a lot more that companies can include, really expanding out more towards product information management, or PIM, by bringing in maybe some commercial information, maybe bringing in some service information. There's a lot more that can be done with PLM systems from a product perspective, that richer view of the product. Also processes, going beyond sort of those design-centric, engineering-centric workflows of engineering change. Maybe building out, if you're in the medical device industry or another regulated industry, to a process like a CAPA, to a broader change control process that addresses a broader scope and meets some compliance needs. Those types of things. And then lastly, lifecycle, and that can be moving either further upstream in the lifecycle through innovation or downstream through manufacturing and service. So we're going to walk through each of these, and then because there are only 4, we have a 5th bonus. So we've got that to look forward to. So I mentioned this richer view of the product, and I think one of the beauties of PLM is its ability to associate information. Derek and I were actually talking earlier about one of the big challenges of an engineering change is not just making the change in a CAD file, but what else does it impact? And that can go beyond just what other CAD file does it impact, but what manufacturing instructions. Maybe it's going to impact actually some of the tooling that's used in manufacturing. Maybe it's going to impact something that's you need to understand based on the inventory that you have. Maybe it's going to change your QA inspection process. So understanding how all of these pieces fit together and doing an impact analysis of a change gets better and better and better the more information that not only do you store, but you associate and keep in the context of a particular product. So, we see people heading down a direction of adding more technical information, maybe heading down sort of a model-based design approach with some tolerance and GD&T types of information, maybe directly even in the CAD model as well as in PLM. It's starting to include, your information that's required to actually, manufacture and assemble things, to test things, putting in commercial data, putting in service documentation, lots of interesting things. The last one that's on here, I'm going to spend just a little bit more time on, is performance data. And one of the things that we're starting to see is this expansion of the product, not just into, what was it designed to do, but what is it actually doing? What's actually happening in the field? And so performance data is an area where we can start thinking about information we're gathering from the IoT or the industrial Internet of Things, and starting to associate that information back. So not just the technical performance specifications, but understanding what's actually happening in the field and being able to do some correlation between those two things. So let's go beyond product to processes, and processes, start to extend again beyond engineering, and you can start with maybe that your reviews and approvals released to manufacturing and those types of things. But there's also, once you've got this richer view of the product, there's so much more that you can do. And our research actually shows that the top performing companies, and those are the companies that are getting the most revenue and profitability growth out of their, not just out of their PLM systems, but out of their business, those top performing manufacturers tend to have more mature PLM implementations. They tend to have more processes and more advanced processes implemented. So here's an example, in this particular chart that breaks down what are the processes that top performers are running in PLM and what the others are, the lesser performing companies. And it's a little odd sorting on this chart, so let me help you understand. We don't think it's as interesting to look at what is most common in both. So, for example, the fact that just over half of the companies at the bottom are running engineering change, just over half of the top performers, and just under half of the others. That probably means it's an important process, but it's not one of the things that's really setting those top performers apart. It's not something that's taking them to the next level of business value. The things at the top of this chart are actually the things that are more common in those top performing companies than in the lesser performing companies, what we call the others. So, for example, being able to get more knowledge out of your information and out of your PLM system by running product analytics or doing product cost management directly within your PLM system, you're going to find that kind of use of PLM much more commonly in top performing companies. Now, our research doesn't say that's why they're top performers, but because it's more common in those companies, we do believe that there's a high likelihood that if you take on those more advanced processes, you're going to see enhanced business performance. Things like managing quality, managing configurations, managing manufacturing processes. So what you see is this growth from not just managing data, not just managing sort of workflows and task-centric kind of things, but moving to more enterprise issues like cost and quality, and then adding in advanced capabilities like analytics. That's where we're really going to start to see the enhanced value. So let's move now to people. And expanding to more people is again something our research shows that there's top performing companies, those that are getting better business performance, are actually have more departments that are directly using their PLM systems, and that actually includes organizations that are very close, like for example, manufacturing is an easy next step because they're obviously taking a lot of the information directly from engineering to produce products, but also places like top management, where they can take a look and understand that overall product development and innovation process and be more in touch with what's happening in the business. So we start to see this expansion to new people, and that really does drive a big opportunity for growth. And again, there's overlap between this and some of the other areas like product and processes. If you're adding in service instructions and service data, you probably are going to extend to your service people. This chart has some examples on that sort of inner ring of different people that you may want to include in your in your collaboration in your PLM system directly. And then outside of that is actually a view into mobile locations where people might be able to access PLM. So that's a little bit different flavor than people, because it's actually getting to people in their natural environment as opposed to only when they're in front of a system. But one of the things you'll see in that inner ring is it starts to move to people outside of engineering, but then it starts to move outside of the company as well, to people in the supply chain, engineering partners, third-party manufacturing, third-party logistics, customers, and others that really play a tremendously valuable role in your innovation process, but also need that information to do their own jobs. So let's move on to the fourth dimension of PLM expansion, the life cycle. And again, I mentioned that this could be in one of two directions. It could be either upstream or downstream. And one of I apologize. You can't see my arms waving around. I'm so excited, and I just knocked my headset right off of my head. Derek and I were having a great animated discussion before we started, so I'm a little fired up. But anyway, sorry for the pause. Upstream and downstream in the life cycle, and this chart is just representative. These are not real statistics, but I think we all know that as you move down from sort of your ideas, your concepts, and down through committing to detailed engineering, committing to actually buying materials and tooling up the plant, your options for change start to dwindle, or the cost of the change starts to really radically ramp up. And there's some great DARPA statistics on this and everything. But the key here is that there are places in the life cycle up front where you want to shift left and get more and more input and more validation before you start locking in all of those decisions in order to get products right. So we see a lot of value in sort of bringing information forward and bringing decisions forward, but also value downstream. And this is where a lot of integration is helpful to things like manufacturing and quality and service, and really into those broader areas that get involved with the product once it's released from R&D or from engineering. So, we're also at this point starting to see, again, with this sort of digital trend that we're, this digital transformation or Industry 4.0, whatever we want to call it, in this transition, starting to see the incorporation of in-service lifecycle information. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, with the product looking at performance data, maybe really starting to get a tighter handle on what's happening with the product while it's out in the field, particularly if it's a piece of equipment in somebody else's plant or infrastructure. So lots of opportunities here to drive some pretty significant value, and again, they can be sort of on the left-hand side of the life cycle or downstream, and we're starting to see them move even further downstream. So the fifth dimension, which is sort of added in now to our 4 dimensions of PLM expansion, is integration, and it's really one of those things that we see quite a bit just stop short when people are doing their initial implementation. People run out of time, they run out of budget, whatever it may be, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna move that to phase 2, or we're gonna move that to phase 3. And unfortunately, one of the key values of a PLM approach is this expansion into more people, more processes, richer view of the data, and more of the life cycle. Well, guess what? A lot of that depends on integration, because those people, those processes, the product information, all ends up being involved with ERP systems, CRM systems. We're now seeing them more and more involved with cloud systems. In fact, we're starting to see, as companies are developing smart products, they're having to involve corporate IT in their product portfolio management and product innovation and product development processes, because the new product that's going to go out needs to be able to communicate back with the corporation, through cloud services, and potentially be making some doing some work directly with, for example, a CRM system or a service lifecycle management system. So integration is a really key area that we see companies gaining greater and greater value from their PLM system, and oftentimes it really is just waiting for somebody to get started and make it happen. I don't want to say it's not rocket science, because there are definitely some techniques and tools that are very helpful. But integration is not as hard as it used to be. And what you really need is people that can help you think it through from a business perspective and then make it happen flawlessly and efficiently on the back end. And we do see in our research, which is what you see on the screen, that those top performers, those that really get the most out of their PLM system, that are really driving the higher levels of business performance, do have a lot more integration. And we see they're integrated with more design tools. We see they're integrated with more enterprise applications than others. And it starts really at the basics. The chart that you see in front of you is that top performers actually see PLM integration they're almost twice as likely to see PLM integration as strategic to their business performance as opposed to others. So it really starts with that base core understanding of the value of integration and then builds on from there. So integration, just to move a little bit further, and again, this information is in the survey report that we did that I know is available from Razorleaf. We've got a lot of good information in there. It talked about sort of the integration with more systems, more design tools, as well as more enterprise applications. What this shows is actually there's more integration with other forms of data. And so, for example, again, in this mode of what's more different between the top performers and others, you see the integration and incorporation with things like 3D image and visualization files. Not quite twice as likely in the top performers as others, but being able to share not a 3D CAD file, because a lot of people in manufacturing or service or customer service don't really want a CAD file. Do they want a 3D image that they can look at? Absolutely. Manufacturing, being able to share with them, information that potentially is, G code, CNC code, something that they can use directly on the floor to produce, and keeping that in sync with the rest of the information about the product, test plans, manufacturing processes, and routings. So what you see at the top of this, the most differentiating things are those things that extend PLM into other parts of the business, into other processes, and then the things at the bottom, like integration to documents, drawings, bills of material, items and parts, specifications, are more common across the different performance classes, top performers, and the red is others. It's not on this chart, I just noticed. So what does that mean? Again, it's probably extremely important to integrate with items, parts, BOMs, drawings, documents, specifications. We're not saying those aren't important, but what we've seen is that the top performers do more, and the top performers have gone beyond and gain more value out of their PLM system. So I mentioned this in my introduction about PLM, and I think it's worth reiterating. The return on investment for PLM comes from a lot of different areas, and a lot of times people focus on the far right, the lower product development cost, engineering efficiency, maybe some reuse, less design rework because we've got some better input up front, those types of things. But there are other things that can really greatly enhance the bottom line of your business by reducing the your product cost, right? By for example, doing a strategic sourcing kind of an approach, and getting some commonality out of your parts and components. But then even further up, innovating, iterating more, and getting a better product. So, if we start to see the ways that companies expand in terms of the value that they get from PLM, it does tend to start from that internal efficiency, getting things under control, moves to more collaborative value inside and outside, and we start to see some decreased product costs and maybe some increased revenue, and then really starts to drive greater innovation. And that should really be the goal for many people. So turning again to one of the interviews, and this was actually the transportation equipment manager that I had a chance to speak with, very good conversation. I like this approach because, as they were looking at how to get more value out of their PLM system, they started out right away with, it's about an ROI. It's about the return on investment. And what I like to think of is once you've got that foundation in place, you've already made the investments. The I doesn't get much higher, but the returns start to get much greater. And the advice that you can read there is, don't do it because you can. Don't do it because it's cool. Know where you want to go and make sure it's valuable to the business, and then keep moving and keep improving. And to me, if you've got a Six Sigma program, Kaizen, and you're finding improvement opportunities in your business, PLM can be a tool to continue to grow and do more to capitalize on those opportunities. One of the things our research actually does show, in fact, is that subsequent implementations of PLM have higher ROI. So, for example, the initial implementation, has an ROI of X. Then the subsequent, implementations that are either expanding or doing more, maybe in one of these 5 dimensions, definitely drive higher ROI than that initial project. So you do get that sort of increased return on the same investment or smaller investment for future. So the last thing I want to touch on is the digital backbone and the role that PLM is playing in the digital enterprise. We're starting to head down this journey, and maybe some of you are further along, and maybe some of you are not quite as far along in moving yourself to a digital manufacturing enterprise. But we're starting to see companies want to have a more complete digital thread, digital continuity from the beginning of designing a product to the end, and traceability back up the other way. being able to have a digital twin to understand what's happening in the field with a product versus what was designed. Gathering information from the Internet of Things or industrial Internet of Things, applying analytics and predictive, machine learning and predictive analytics on top of those things. There's so much that companies are looking to do right now. It's very hard to do any of that if you don't have your products under control. You can't have a digital twin if you don't have a BOM that's under control. If you don't know your bill of material, I don't know how you can possibly understand what your product is actually doing out in the field at any sort of a detailed basis. If you're not managing all your variant configurations, so this is drawn a blank on my example, I apologize, but this is variation 7 as opposed to the standard. This is the one with the the extra flange and the bigger cylinder, those kinds of things. If you don't know that about the product and have that information locked down and be able to trust it, it's hard to move to that next digital step. So with that, I think regardless of whether you're at the point where you're pushing the envelope of being a digital, a digital enterprise, or if you're more at the lower end of the maturity curve on that, there's a lot that you can do with the PLM system to grow value over time, to get more and more out of it. And starting with ensuring that the basics are locked down, looking for those opportunities to grow across those 5 different dimensions, gaining higher ROI from each initial effort that you put on top of it. And as our transportation equipment manufacturer, the manager there said, let the business be the guide. Let the ROI be the guide. Don't do it because it's cool, but do it because it's the right thing to improve the business. So I want to thank you for listening to my part. I want to turn it now over to Derek, and he can talk a little bit about what's next and what does it look like down that journey further with a PLM implementation to get more value. Derek?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Jim. So I just wanted to comment on a couple takeaways that I had in your presentation I thought were pretty interesting. Kind of if I had to sum it up, I would say that what we're trying to emphasize or to establish is that PLM is not a necessary evil, like maybe it was 15 years ago. When we were moving to parametric CAD systems, we said, well, we need data management, so we have to get PLM or PDM. And what we're really talking about is that that's really not the case. That may have been your initial investment, but there are other things that we can do. I like that chart that you had that showed some of the processes that those top performers are doing versus others, and how they're actually seeing top line benefit because they're doing things in PLM that are different than just the basics. I thought that was a really good takeaway. And then lastly, you kind of at the end, you talked a little bit about integration. And I would wholeheartedly agree with the comment that you made about it's not as hard as it used to be. There was one time when we would integrate systems and they were on different platforms. There was a mainframe to a PC, or this database to that database. And so much of that has gone away now with some of the standards, with XML, with all of that sort of stuff, APIs, and I would agree that it's not nearly as hard as it used to be, and there is a lot of value that can be had with those sort of things. So those are just kind of a couple of takeaways that I had. I thought that was pretty interesting. So where do you go from there? Where do you go with that? What is the next step? And if you kind of think about what we talked about today, I'm reminded of a quote from, I think it was Alexander Graham Bell. He said, the only difference between success and failure is the ability to take action. And so, getting information is great, but what do you do with that information? Because the information itself doesn't really take you to that next step. So here at Razorleaf, when we look at our customers and we look at our clients out there, we really find that they kind of fall in one of 3 major categories. When you talk about where they live on that PLM journey. If you want to jump to that slide, there you go, Jim. These are kind of the major buckets they fall into, and there's probably some subsets under here. But we find that we have companies that know that they need PLM. So for whatever reason, maybe they're a highly regulated company. Their product is one that involves complex bills of material. They know they need PLM. but they just can't simply justify it by knowing that they need PLM. We have to know something more about that. Specifically, what's it going to do for me? And what does that project look like? You know, what do I do under phase 1 and what do I do under phase 2 and 3? And what is the relative cost and the scope of those phases? So we find companies that fall within that category. Additionally, we find companies that they have PLM and maybe they implemented PLM for one of those other reasons. You know, felt like maybe they were kind of forced to. Again, parametric CAD or some other reason that we had to have PLM. But we know we're not doing the sort of things that we talked about this afternoon with it. We're not doing a lot of those process things. We're not, you know, really moving towards that digital thread. So how do we get there? How do we take the PLM we have today and how do we start using it to the fullest? Or what is the next thing that we should be looking at with PLM? And then we find that people fall into a third bucket, which is where they have PLM and they are in fact taking advantage of it, but they want to take it to that next level. So they want to really create a system that has that holistic view of product data and integrate it with other systems. How do we do that? How do we, you know, bite off? What sort of things should we bite off in order to go down that path? And so I think that's kind of a summary of where we tend to see that people are. So at Razorleaf, you know, we're a consulting services organization, and we like to help people get to those places. And these are some of the things that we've done with our customers to try to help them get to those places. You know, one thing we didn't mention at the beginning, for those of you that aren't aware, Razorleaf is a PLM agnostic company. So we're not a reseller of a product. Instead, we're just professional services. So we provide services on top of products. So it gives us a little bit of ability to kind of give a different perspective on how people should or could be using PLM. So you notice some of the things that we put up there. You know, we help companies with kind of road mapping PLM. What would it do for me, and how would it do that, and what do I do in phase 1 and what do I do in phase 2, and what do those things look like? We've went into customers, and this is something that we frequently do, which is a health check. And we go into a company and we say, what was your original plan, and what was your anticipated ROI, and where are you today? And then how do we bridge that gap between what you were hoping to gain and what you did gain, and how do we bridge that? How do we get you to where you need to get to? A value assessment. Why would we use PLM? What's it going to do for? Why would I take my PLM from the PDM I have today to the next step? What's it going to do for me? Because I have to be able to prove to the organization that it's going to provide us some value and some return on that investment. So how would I do that? And then lastly, this idea of this digital thread maturity. So, you know, the digital thread touches design, it touches service, it touches manufacturing, it touches quality. Where am I in that state? You know, am I doing good with digitalization of CAD data, but not so good with our quality? And again, how do I bridge that gap to try to get my processes, my tools, and my people over to a place where we can have a digital thread that works its way through the entire product? As Jim mentioned, we see PLM as kind of the foundation for many of these things. There's a lot that you can't do unless you have a nice PLM foundation. And so we've been trying to help our customers to try to get to those places. So we'd like to offer that Razorleaf, that's something that we could help you with. Not everything that we show up on the screen here is something that is a paid engagement. Frequently, we can talk on the phone for a few hours with somebody and really try to help them lay out for themselves what is what's the next best step. And so as Julianne mentioned at the beginning, I'll turn it back over to her in just one second, but we're going to send out the ebook that Jim Brown authored, and we'll go ahead and follow up with you and you know, just ask you, hey, is there some things that you want to bounce off of Razorleaf, or some things that we can bring to the table to try to help you? We've got a number of different assets that we help provide our customers that they can read and educate themselves, which can then help them go off and try to prove that ROI or try to determine what the next best step is. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Julianne, to handle some questions.
Great. Thanks, Derek. And thanks, Jim. It was a great overview by both of you. We did get a few questions coming in today that I'd like to get right to, because I know some folks, some of them have been sitting here for a little bit. Okay, so the first question we have is, do you see more companies moving forward with cloud PLM or on-site PLM, and why?
I'll take first crack at that one, Derek, if you don't mind. You know, I would say clearly yes. We are starting to see more people move forward with cloud PLM, but it's a more nuanced question than that, because there's a couple of different ways people are moving in cloud PLM. We actually see some companies that will have an on-site, you know, PLM that may be more of a PDM system that are actually augmenting with something on the cloud to do more of the process management. So they're kind of leaving data in more of a traditional mode, sort of those PDM capabilities, and then doing more of the collaboration, more of the process management, project management on the cloud. But we're also starting to see companies looking at taking the entire system that they have. So they're working with one of the major vendors and making sure that there's a cloud approach to doing that, and to moving it into a cloud environment. And there are lots of different cloud PLM implementation options, right? There's more of the sort of pure, you know, software as a service, sign up, just pay on a subscription, get started from nothing, and those are great. But there are also things like managed services, where people are taking their existing implementations and just turning them over and having them managed by others via the cloud, and taking advantage of a lot of the options there. So I apologize. I know it's a long answer to a short question, but it's actually not a simple topic. But the short answer is yes, the cloud is real. PLM is moving to the cloud, and in fact, our recommendation is if you're working with a PLM vendor that doesn't have a cloud strategy, you should probably be asking them why.
Great, thanks. Derek, did you want to add anything to that? Or
yeah, I did. I think I would add to that. I would agree with everything that Jim said there. And certainly we find organizations that, due to the type of company they are, they either need to be on the cloud or actually quite the opposite. For example, a defense manufacturer cloud may not be an option. But in general, aside from those constraints, I think we do see that there's a large move to the cloud. But here's the key, though. The vendor or the architecture that vendor chooses doesn't get you the value that we talked about, right? PLM is about a couple things. There's software that automates, manages, controls, but then there's process that software then automates, manages, and controls. And so one of the things that we frequently find that I consider a bit of a shortcoming of PLM vision is what software should we use to improve our process? That's not the question. How do we improve our process is the question. And then the software is going to help us to automate and control what we've already improved. In fact, many of the PLM vendors do the same functions in a very similar way. So I think the question is valid. Yes, there is a move to the cloud. I think we need to make sure that we back up and say, unless there's something that's forcing us to be cloud, the first thing we really need to do is talk about what are we trying to accomplish. And then we'll look at the software vendors and look at their cloud strategy. We need to make sure they have one, but that should be a secondary question.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
great. Okay, another question here. It was just mentioned that the subsequent implementations actually drive up the cost of ROI compared to the original implementation. How do you control that when you're implementing in phases? For instance, we're implementing the CAD control first, and then we're going to do change control next.
So yeah, just to make sure, the way I heard that and what I was trying to say and what the research said sounded different. So let me just make sure that I was clear. The ROI actually goes up with subsequent implementation. So if you're starting with cloud control, getting your CAD under control, you may get say a 3x return on investment from that, or you may look at it as a payback time. You're going to get a higher return by moving it to the next level, because it's not going to cost you as much to do that to add on those next pieces, and you're going to get higher levels of business value. So the ROI actually goes up on those subsequent subsequent expansions is probably a better word to call them, because the cost is smaller and the return is greater.
Yeah, and Jim, I like the way that you put it when you were presenting it, is that the those subsequent phases, the R goes up and the I goes up, but the I goes up incrementally compared to how fast the R is going up. I think that's the key.
Yeah, the I goes up much. It's not as big as the initial I. It's much smaller, and then the R goes up. So maybe expansions is probably the. I'm going to probably change my language on that.
Okay. So another question, well, you talked about a phased approach. Where do most people start?
So
Derek, you probably do more of these, yeah.
Yeah, I'll start with, I mean, it's that you start with the low-hanging fruit, and certainly data management, document management, CAD file management, that's the low-hanging fruit. It's pretty easy to know that we need to do that and we can get value out of that. I don't think that you just automatically start there just because that's where everyone else is starting. I do think that it's important to look at what we're trying to do, and we see customers that don't start there. In fact, we see customers that have extremely robust and mature PLM implementations, and they're doing CAD file management in another system, in a PDM system, maybe provided by the CAD vendor. Because they have a product that's very system engineering focused, or it's heavy BOM focused. And so the CAD is important, but not as important. So I think CAD file management is certainly the most obvious thing to look at, but you do need to look at it. You don't just automatically go to CAD file management because that's what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and we do see sort of process management, workflow task management being another way, or projects, sort of coming in more from the streamlining execution versus managing data is another way. It's not as common, but it definitely is another option. And as Derek said, people may already have something that has everything else, the data under control. Being able to integrate to sort of an enterprise PLM system with a sort of a more core product data management system is definitely an option.
Well, and I just might add to that while oftentimes CAD file management seems like the right first choice, if you've went without any CAD file management for a period of time, oftentimes that hurdle can be a very high one to bridge, right? Because you've got potentially decades worth of unmanaged and uncontrolled CAD files that before we can start using our PLM system, we've got to get the data in there. And that sometimes can be hard. So companies may start with a BOM management approach. You know what, we'll continue to manage our CAD files the old way, which isn't good, but at least we can get some value out of a PLM. And then we're going to slowly bring those CAD files in versus trying to bring in 10, 20 years worth of unmanaged files into a system only to find out we have duplicates, we have, assemblies that can't resolve and that sort of thing.
Great. Got one more question. So you were talking about expanding, processes to outside of the organization. So, a lot of PLM happens inside of the organization, but when you start looking at the supply chain and expanding processes outside of that, what are some of the biggest stop gaps there? And who owns that data, and how does that all flow?
Well, there's a couple different ways people are doing it now. I mean, one of the things, if we fast forward more towards the digital realm and start thinking about a pure cloud approach, is you've got people that are playing different roles and in a common PLM system, but that's not quite as common right now. Typically, what it is you've got suppliers that are coming in, or customers that are coming in and working within your PLM environment. And so the thought of who owns the intellectual property is relatively straightforward because it's in your system. And then as you invite people in, they typically have a very limited set of information and processes that they're allowed to access. So I think that actually will get a little more complicated as we move to more of a more virtual organizations that come together around projects, more cloud-oriented solutions than probably expanding your traditional PLM system.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't have a lot to add to that. I think that's a good explanation.
Good. And I think we have one more question. And if anyone has any other questions, I just encourage you to put in the questions box. What does PLM, I'm sorry, what PLM does and what does ERP does, it seems like a little bit of a gray area. Is there some delineation that is easier to articulate? The crossover.
I'll take a hard pass on that one, Derek, if you want to go first. That's
I mean, it's a common question because at some point they start to overlap, right? I mean, if we're talking about extending PLM to do more than just CAD file management into the actual design, manufacturing, quality of the product, then you start to get into the quality and manufacturing of the product, which is where ERP tends to live. And so there certainly is a difference. And I think this goes back to where we talk about integration. It's different for every company. Some companies have ERP systems that are not as mature and are closer to MRP systems, and other companies have very integrated and very streamlined ERP systems that have things like CRM functionality and manufacturing functionality, as well as planning functionality. So I think it's different, but I think integration is the key there. Is that there's clearly some things that PLM need to do. For example, you typically aren't going to put non-released product bills of material in an ERP system. So you know, you could put CAD files, I guess, in an ERP system, but typically it's not going to manage them as well as a well-integrated PLM system would. So I think the key is to really talk about, you know, what are we missing out of our ERP system, or vice versa, what are we missing out of our PLM system? And there is an integration between the two. So, you know, you would be remiss to think that one stops and one starts. You'd be remiss to think that it's the same for every company or every industry. It's different. But the key is there are clearly some things that PLM, PDM do and some things that ERP do, and then there's a place where they overlap and where integration starts to happen.
Yeah, well said. And you know, I think the key thing is it's not one or the other. It's both, and it's integrated. And you know, I used to have a nice little framework that, you know, would work for me 80 to 90% of the times as a place to start the conversation. And now with the digital enterprise, you know, things are starting to change, and you know, there are even new systems that are needing to be integrated in. You know, if you've got a product that you are monitoring via the IoT, you know, you may have started to design it in a PLM system. You may have managed the production on the shop floor in an MES system, managed the whole procurement of it and manufacturing process from a business perspective in ERP. But now you've got this system out there that you're collecting data on and doing analytics in a cloud system, needing to pull information from ERP, needing to pull information from PLM. So it's actually gotten more complicated, and the need for integration has gotten a lot more broad at this point. And so, and Derek, just one thing I wanted to say. One thing is, the reason I never say that it's gotten easier is because I don't do it for a living anymore. So I never like to say something is not hard to do unless I'm actually doing it. And You're one of the guys that goes out there and gets it done. So I was glad to hear that you said it's easier.
I agree. Yes.
Great. We just got another question in. What about a product configurator? Do you find that companies are utilizing a product configurator in the PLM system?
Well, configurators is another interesting area. I mean, there's configurators in CRM systems that are more for assemble to order, features and options, pricing. Some people call them CPQ, configure, price, quote. ERP and CRM systems have those. One of the leading ERP systems has more than one. And then you've got really engineer to order, where it's really doing some design automation and doing engineering calculations on the back end. And so, you know, what I would say is that companies that are in either a MTO, manufacturer to order, or an ETO environment definitely struggle with configuration. It's hard enough to keep bombs straight when you don't have a whole lot of variance. When it really is on an order by order basis, you need something, and we've seen that configurators can definitely help. You know, streamline processes, get more accurate quotes, get quotes faster. That's a whole nother exciting topic, actually. So I'll turn that over to Derek for his insights.
Yeah, and I hate to keep harping on integration, but this is where integration comes in, because you know, you're not going to do pure configuration, you know, CPQ in a PLM system. However, in order for our configuration system to be accurate, it needs to pull design data. It needs to pull, you know, information that's in the design environment. And so there's clearly an integration between those. And so we do see people doing some extent of configuration inside of the PLM system, but if you're in a heavily configured product, you're going to have a purpose-built configurator for that, but it needs to talk to the other systems as well.
Yeah, there's cool stuff coming down the pike on there in that area right now too, and what you're going to see is a whole lot more customer-facing, 3D, probably even with some, augmented reality, virtual reality, kind of an interface to customers where they can actually configure something, sit inside it, see what it's like, and almost experience it before they order it, and then some real automation on the back end. But yeah, Derek, absolutely, people have to assemble a lot of the pieces in most cases.
Well, great. I think that concludes it. We don't see any more questions coming in, and we're really close on time here, so I want to make sure people have a chance to get back to what they need to. So I want to just thank you both, Jim and Derek, for a great presentation. It was very interesting. I learned a few things here. Just to reiterate with everyone on the call that we will be sending out this recording within 24 to 48 hours, and with the new ebook that Jim was sharing some of the data with here today. So with that, I want to thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you all for your great questions. That was excellent interaction. I appreciate that, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.